and in moments of great challenges, as we're living through right now, it's sometimes hard to be hopeful and be able to think of the future. But in my tradition, I'm a Presbyterian. We for us, faith is very tightly connected with imagination, right? You have to be able to imagine what doesn't exist, what your eyes cannot see. And I always think of philosopher Jonathan Lears. He has this book called Radical Hope, and he came up with that theory reading an interview that the last Crow chief gave before he died. Plenty Coops, Chief Plenty Coops. He gave this interview, and he was the last chief in his tribe. There was no logical reason for him to be hopeful. Yet in the interview, he spoke as if the future of his tribe was healthy and hopeful, right? He was going to continue. And Jonathan Lear said that this is a radical type of hope, right? Not the superficial hope, but radical in the Latin sense, right? To the roots. It's deeply rooted because it is only able to be practiced because of what Lear said calls imaginative excellence. Because he's this Plenty Coop's imagination had not been restrained by Western logic, by rationality, right? Who says that what cannot be, right? It's usually, rational choices or even market values telling us what can and cannot be. But if you get rid of that, really anything is possible. I hope I can usher you into a moment into the next 2 days in a state of radical hopefulness. And so to do that, I invite you to close your eyes if you're comfortable. Take a few deep breaths. And I invite you to remember the things that for you at one point it was impossible. But then it was. And then it happened. Perhaps it was love, a friendship, a delicious meal you ate. Perhaps it's something bigger that you never thought was possible. And yet it happened. And invite you to think of the radical hope that could make that possible. And I invite you to think of your ancestors, those who came before. What was their radical hope? Our ancestors who immigrated by choice or by force with a radical hope that things could be different. And how many of us in this room, we are the embodiment of that radical hope. Whose radical hope are we the embodiment of today? And then think of 50, even 100 years from now. And imagine those who will be here because of our radical hope today. Creator, Spirit, giver of all good things, we ask that you will give us the spiritual eyes to see with radical hope through the cultural devastation and into the building and the creation of the future we all need. Amen.
Thank you so much, Tony. I want to do a little bit of acknowledgments and housekeeping, and then sort of try to talk a little bit about what we're doing here for the next couple of days. First of all, the Yale School of Environment has been hosting, this is the 7th annual Global Environmental Justice Conference. We started theming it Environmental Joy 3 years ago, and our dean and faculty have been incredibly supportive. And our students, as you can see, have helped pull these things together in incredible ways every year. So I want to thank the school and the students and the community that we operate in and thrive in. Do we have Susan's book somewhere? I was supposed to hold it up, but I don't have it with me. A lot of our thinking about process was assisted by a woman named Susan Stern, who's a professor at Columbia Law School, who thinks about theater of change. Her books are available to everybody who's come to the conference. We'll hold it up at some point during one of the plenaries. It's been back there. Lexi's holding it up, but you can get a copy. And I guess she could sign them all. She says she might be interested in doing that, so we'll see. She'll be at the reception signing them. I want to ask our theme leads to stand up. I'll talk a little bit about what that means, but the people leading our themes who are in the room, if you could stand up for a second, please. These are the folks who are also helped us co-design this process and will be facilitating, leading, and helping us write the future for the next 2 days. So thank them very much for their work. Could everyone who worked on the Congress stand up and just wave? Just all of you, Lexi, everybody in the back, and raise your hand if you can, if you helped with the Congress rather, all over the room. Yeah, amazing team. We have our stuff so together this year. I think we have a live. I'll tell you why in a minute, but why we're live streaming a lot as well. I want to thank the team at the Yale Center for Environmental Justice. We have 4 major programs represented by Asha Brundage-Moore. And if you have questions about our center, I want you to go, Asha, where are you? Yeah, stand up if you could just for a second. Asha runs the Collaborative Clinic for Nonprofit Viability, which was formed functionally as a result of this conference last year. Our communities who came told us how scared they were about the threats that would come, not just to the laws, but to the organizations themselves. And Asha and Professor Torres have stood up a clinic at the Yale Law School, and we'll be standing up a couple of others in collaboration with other law schools to help organizations just keep existing in this difficult time. Thanks, Asha. Thanks, Asha. Yeah. I don't think Vlad is here. Is Axel here? Maybe not either. We have a team that's working on artificial intelligence and environmental justice, both on working with communities to figure out how to fight or protect themselves, but also how to use AI to build political power. There's a demonstration on one of the tables out there. I would urge you to go check out the tools we've built. We are one of the few people in the world building AI to build political power. Literally, that's how you can use it. Sina Fikesh, are you here? Sina Fikesh Wolde is in the back. She runs our framing climate migration work. One of the other deep pumps in climate work is the migration pump. Twice as many people move every year because of climate than do because of war today. And that also shifts politics to the right, which depresses climate policy, which accelerates more migration. So we're trying to help break that cycle with communities all over the world, including in Angola and the border and New England right here. We have a pretty big indigenous staff. If you all could stand up. Gerald runs the program, but Jim Diamond, David Cordero, are you here? And Chuck Sams could not join us, the director of our indigenous program, who just joined us a couple months ago, who just stepped down as the head of the National Park Service. And we have others on the team as well. It's an amazing team. Thank you for being here. Yeah. And we were heavy into energy justice, the IRA changes, but we figured out what to do now. We're starting to get back into energy justice work. We'll tell you about that some other time. So let me say again, good morning, everybody. James Baldwin wrote a wonderful essay called The Uses of the Blues, in which he works a Bessie Smith song. She says, good morning, blues. Blues, how do you do? I'm doing all right. Good morning. How are you? In 2003, we had the first Environmental Joy Conference. This is a congress this year. I'll talk about that in a minute. We had been sponsored by USAID for a couple of years before that as an environmental justice conference. environmental joy was tough, and because the US Congress were controlled by, well, the US Congress called USAID up to the hill to explain why they were hosting conferences on environmental joy. They seemed to be okay with environmental justice, but USAID could not support us last year because of the title Environmental Joy. Right? Good morning, Blues. How are you doing? Last year, we had the conference. We've been trying to train ourselves to say Congress. 3 days, 4 days after the US general election in a year of the historical election year around the world. And it was incredibly powerful. It was intergenerational, intersectoral. There was an incredible amount of support and ideas that were generated, that some of which we've been able to put into action. People who attended also were able to put into action. It was a super powerful thing to do. We postponed it a week because we knew the election was consequential, and it was super important. It was very powerful for folks who were here, and you can check out some of the videos and stuff online. So I want to talk a little bit about what we do here, right? And why we do an Environmental Joy Congress or conference. Joy is an idea with diverse meanings, right? It can be innate, a graceful feeling based in harmony with nature, community, faith, culture, laws, and policy, or even the economy. Joy is what injustice can take from us, and also what we regain when healing and repair occur. Joy is a core piece of what we seek when working for justice, for joy, for justice, or for anything, frankly. Joy is something that is celebrated in community and can also be the wind in our individual souls and the goal that sustains us as we work for a better world. All of us in our own ways are working towards alleviation of suffering and increasing joy. That's what we do. That's what we're on the planet to do. Environmental joy on an annual basis, this Congress gets to the point by exploring and celebrating the diverse ways in which environmental justice achieves these goals. Environmental joy is a space for multidisciplinary and multicultural dialogue and innovation, with the goal of helping the field of environmental and climate justice discover, showcase, and grow practices that alleviate suffering and generate well-being and joy. Reflecting the growing maturity of this idea, we decided this year to try to host this as a Congress, as an even more democratic and participatory process, adding deliberative processes that will take place in the coming day and a half. The deep dismantling underway in 2025 may not stop for a while. Good morning, Blues. And so we thought, as I think many people around the country and around the world are thinking, that we have to start thinking about what comes next. No matter how long this era lasts, we have to start preparing. Unfortunately, we have some time before we're going to be able to really start coming back in charge and changing things. And so we thought this year to have a Congress about writing the future, about starting the process of how do we as communities, how do we as people, as citizens, go about thinking about and structuring the way we're going to work together to build a really different future, to put back something together that is as deep as this dismantling that's going on right now. To do that, we're going to ask 3 questions over the next, today mostly, actually over the next 2 days. What's working? What do we want to leave behind? And what's the future? And we're going to do that across 4 themes: sustainable infrastructure, the built and natural world. We're going to ask the questions around how do we reconcile justice and equitable development with the speed at which we have to change our infrastructure in the era of climate and environmental challenges. We have to swap out our entire energy system. How do we do that fast, democratically, in ways that don't mow our communities over, but also get us off the wreck that we're riding on right now? Sustainable economics. How should a sustainable economy operate with respect to opportunity, wealth creation, and justice? Spiritual and mutual aid and the spiritual world. How do we get right ritually with respect to our relationship to nature and to each other? What kind of solidarity can we build or restore? We have a really wonderful group of theme leads leading this theme. Sometimes we forget how much spiritual activities in our day-to-day operations, in the way we live, right? There are people putting the 10 Commandments in classrooms all over the country right now. That's an operational thing happening in classrooms. Whether you agree with that or not, what do we want in our classrooms spiritually? What do we want in our communities? How do we want to shape our practices? And finally, ways of knowing and ways of decision-making, which is also an incredibly real thing, right? When facts are in dispute, when the courts are extremely in dispute, there are lawyers in that track, but there's also leaders in indigenous knowledge. How do we use different forms of knowledge in making our decision? So we're trying through this process of environmental joy gatherings to make joy real, to learn the practices of joy. So 2 more things. The besides how we're running the Congress. So basically what we'll be doing is today, you'll be answering those questions in a deliberative way. Your theme leads will not be speaking a lot. They'll be exhorting you, helping you get launched in your conversations. There's at least 45 to 50 minutes of breakout time in every 2-hour session in which we're going to ask people to try to see if they can come up with common points of what to leave behind, what to keep, and what's the future. Two other big points I want to make. One is it's really easy to point fingers about the problems we have, and there's no shortage of us or thems out there in the work we do. But not all of our problems are just about us and them, about getting the thems out of the way. We have to figure out how we together come together. I've talked to a lot of folks leading up in this period in general. We all have to build really different coalitions to make these things real. Coalitions across different disciplines, coalitions across different sectors, but also coalitions across different political, faith, and cultural lines. And a lot of those folks are represented here. A lot of different cultures are represented here. Still not as many as we'd liked. I tried to get a couple of Republicans to come speak. They didn't say, they were just too busy. Honestly, they really did want to come speak. But sometimes it's hard to, anyway. The bottom line is we have to figure out how to build coalition. And a lot of the smartest people I know, are doing incredible work in the energy sector in states and local governments and other places, are talking about building coalitions across really unusual partners on whatever we can find common ground about. When we work on joy, it becomes clear that solving for the tragedies that we face right now is not simply about moving away from what we're doing that's unhealthy, from pivoting away from the things that are plainly driving us down the wrong road, not just on climate, but on economies burdened by the sheer volume of money we need to spend to keep the water, the heat, the fire at bay, on our bodies burdened by toxins that microscopically permeate our cells. We're not just fighting the fact that the bodies of our loved ones, as well as distant strangers, are driven to war to protect oil fields and oil trillions that prop up regimes that have forgotten why they exist to safeguard deep wells and the fortunes that flow from them. We are among those regimes as the top producer of fossil fuels in the world, right? Slogan that is several presidential candidates and leaders say all the time is "Burn, baby, burn." Like, what kind of slogan is that for the planet we want? Most importantly, the impact of this is, I think, on our souls, the corrosion that comes from seeing no way out. To quote maybe my favorite environmental song from Pink Floyd, from trading heroes for ghosts, hot ashes for trees, hot air for a cool breeze. These are the things we all do every day and have to think about the choices we make. Hence the purpose of the conference, to elevate and to learn about the ways that frontline communities thrive in the face of adversity, find ways to make power in the midst of oppression, find the strength to defend not only themselves, but to expand the terms of struggle and to connect to other communities, to other social movements, and most critically, to the air, the water, the soil, the animals, the plants, the earth as part of doing so. That's what folks who work on environmental justice do all the time. I believe this is what makes us smile. It's this idea of environmental joy is probably the simplest thing I've ever worked on. It's like when I used to work on software and you want to watch people like light up when you have an idea. You can't even finish the syllable joy before people smile when you talk about what we're doing here, right? It brings such happiness. And I think, why can we smile? What makes us smile when we ask the blues, how are you? Some plain truths. A, that we're all connected most powerfully through joy. Underneath and perhaps on top of all the environmental despoilation is the powerful truth of environmental joy, environmental beauty, and the joy that can bring us there. Something else that makes people smile is that somewhere, someone at this Congress is naming the truth of joy. That if you're working on joy, you're headed in the right direction, because what other higher purpose for nature, the environment, for our own day-to-day work is there? An innate understanding that joy is not the opposite of sorrow, but the thing we get when we emerge from it, the lift that is produced when we've achieved a key change. And finally, that joy is what it is, and that nothing else surely can bring us as much joy as the environment, as the place that made us and the place that we deeply belong. So we're really grateful for you all being here with us these next few days and these next 2 days. And we're going to get to work writing the future. So with that, I want to introduce my partner in this amazing effort, Professor Gerald Torres, who's the founder of the Yale Center for Environmental Justice and one of our great environmental justice leaders as well. Thank you.
I'd like to invite the panelists, the first panelists, to come to the stage. I'm not going to say much except to thank you all for being here. And I think, you know, you should just look around the room. Look around the room, right? And the people you see in this room are the people who are going to change the future, right? And so you should be happy to be part of this group. And I'm happy to see all of y'all here.
I think I forgot, we have high school students. In the common ground, I think we New York City by 10:30.
So I'd like to introduce the panelists. Francis Beinecke, former president of the NRDC and graduate of this school, and a lifetime committed to the environment. One of the early people who identified the issues that form the kind of core of environmental justice and recognized it and brought some of that thinking into the mainstream environmental groups. Peggy Shepard, who she probably will object to this, but the godmother of environmental justice, helped a co-founder of We Act for environmental justice 35 years ago, I believe. Is that right? So that's 35 years is a generation. So she's a generational leader and brings a wealth of wisdom, both about the environment, but also about the processes that you need to engage in order to make change happen. And finally, Nina Gualinga, who's Sarayaku from Ecuador, who works on indigenous issues, primarily focusing on the issues involving indigenous women, a global leader, and who brings, I think, incredible insight. And so we will go until about what, 10:30. So not a lot of time, but what we're going to do is to engage the questions, right? What do you want to leave behind? What do you want to keep? And what do you want the future to be? And what I'd like when we all leave in an hour is for you to start to think about those questions yourselves and take the thoughts that you have into the sessions and to think creatively, think boldly, think imaginatively, because that's where the future is going to come from. All right. So who should start? Francis?
Oh. Can you hear me? When
Yeah.
you turn this on?
Yep, turn it on and hold it close. Yep, hold it close.
How about that?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you, Gerald. Thank you all for being here. I came last year. Peggy and I were here. And last year, the conference was just 2 days after the election. I said to Michael, how can this, if Trump wins, how can this be an environmental joy conference? But the fact is, it really was joyful because of the energy and enthusiasm and commitment of all the people in the room. And I know that will be a result of this conference too. As I said to Peggy earlier today, we thought we were prepared for what the Trump administration would bring, but we weren't. And the full-scale assault, not only on the environmental sector, but every sector of social justice has been just shocking. I mean, I can't even describe a word for how complete it's been. And so one of the things that inspired me last year with Richard and Peggy was talking about the civil rights struggle and how long it takes. And I think that today and tomorrow, you really have to have long range thinking because this will not be solved quickly. I'm not even sure it'll be solved in my lifetime, but in your lifetime, it will be. And thinking about what are the building blocks to having the power to creating a future that we all want is what you're really here to do. So I just have a couple of thoughts to share with you. First of all, it's important to be inspired because inspiration is what motivates you to move forward. So I think what inspires me? Well, one person who inspires me is Bill McKibben. I saw him earlier this summer. He's come out with the book, Here Comes the Sun. I'm sure not too many of you were part of Beatlemania, as I was. The song, Here Comes the Sun, just the title inspires me. But when you hear Bill, he goes, let's acknowledge the science, acknowledge the politics, but focus on what we can do. And we can create a solar future. Each of us individually and collectively, it's cheaper, it's available. Let's get moving. So he inspires me. Robin Wall Kimmerer inspires me. She has created a movement in a very quiet way with Braiding Sweetgrass, Serviceberry, these books about indigenous learning, how the connection of ecological knowledge and traditional indigenous knowledge connect. And she's created a campaign, Plant Baby Plant. It's a social media campaign, and it's humorous because it's designed to counteract Trump's drill baby drill, and it connects us with nature. So those are just two examples of people who inspire me, but you need to be inspired to do this work. So you each have your own people. So inspiration is number one. Number two is, what do we do in the immediate? Well, in the immediate, we have to defend, and defend is litigation, NRDC's sort of core strength, so important. During the first Trump administration, we won over 90% of the cases we brought against Trump. Litigation is critical. Voice is critical. And we've seen voice with No Kings, Sunday, every demonstration that's available out there, we need to participate in and show that we don't agree with the direction that he's taking the country in. Most importantly, vote. Voting is just critical. We're not, he wants us to believe that they won with an overwhelming majority. It was the slimmest majority ever, 80,000 votes in 3 key states. We can win the midterms, we can win the next general election, but not without tremendous organizing. So that's in the immediate. And then in the longer term, we have to rebuild political power. There's a new book out on Jesse Jackson's Building Black Power, when his 2 campaigns for president, which I've just started to listen to. And I think figuring out how we build broader power. Michael said, we need much broader coalitions, unusual coalitions, deeper coalitions. We need grassroots organizing. We need community-based activities. These are all things that need to be the building blocks of building the political power of the future. The environmental community, the not-for-profit C3 community needs to put much more effort on the voting C4 side of things. We need to, and this is not me, this is you, need to be skilled in social media. I just went to a whole session on social media, which honest to God, I have no comprehension of, but it's creators and influencers. I was told, one young woman who's working in this space, I said, how do you find these creators? She said, we have a database of 200,000 creators. I was like, oh my goodness, this is like a huge opportunity to figure out how we reach people in a very different way. And I think, the most emblematic of that is the campaign of Mamdani, who is going to become, I'm sure, the next mayor of the city of New York on Tuesday, on social media. This guy, I mean, it's really astonishing. He came from nowhere in a matter of months because he connected with young people, he's skilled in social media, and he talked about a future that he wanted to see. Not focusing on what are all the problems of New York City, but what is the city we want us to see, a city that provides equity and is affordable. And I think key to anything that we take forward is economic justice and affordability. That's how Trump won the election. It permeates every campaign. It is a fundamental issue to the state of America right now. It is the core of Jesse Jackson's campaigns, was economic justice. So I hope that in these conversations, you really think about that. And then Finally, what are the policy prescriptions going forward? Well, I'll just say the environmental community has spent 55 years promoting policy prescriptions, which is why I'm putting it third, not first, because I think political power communication is absolutely fundamental to any policy prescription you come up with. But there's a very lively debate going on right now between, do we hold on to what we have, or do we think about a different future? We are losing what we have now. We have to think about a different future. We can't afford not to. But I think in doing that, you can look at, what do we have that really hasn't worked? Let's not fool ourselves. The environmental protection system has been layered on over 50 years because we were getting bits of knowledge as we went forward. So there's a statute here, a statute there, a statute there. It's a labyrinth, but we know all these issues are integrated. So how do we develop an integrated, efficient system that protects public health, protects the environment, and advances just the kinds of things that Michael was talking about? So I don't know what the answer is. And guess what? You do, because this is your future and this is what you're going to be talking about the next few days. But it is the building blocks of all of the pieces that are going to make a social movement that's going to be successful in the long term. So I'm happy to be here, and I really look forward to what the Congress comes out with. And being courageous and being bold is absolutely central to it. So off you go, and good luck.
Thank you, Francis. You know, when I teach environmental law, the students come in and they want to ask the big questions, right? And as an environmental lawyer, I would say, you know, there's a lot of little questions you have to be able to answer before you can answer the big questions. But because of the political moment we're in, I think we're in a moment when you can start asking the big questions, when you don't have to just defend what's there, but you can ask, what do we need and how do we build that future? So I think you're exactly right, Francis. Nina?
Hi, everyone. I'm really glad to be here. I think I was here about 7 years ago. My baby was about a year old when I was here. And I'm extra happy to be here today because my sister's here too. She's studying here, and she's in the room. We both work on very similar things back home. In the Ecuadorian Amazon. So I think I want to start by maybe sharing a little bit about what has been working for us for the past, I don't know how many thousand years, and for the past 500 years, 400 years maybe. So back home, so I'm from the Ecuadorian Amazon, from the Quechua people of Sarayaku. And when I was about 8 years old, this fossil fuel, this oil company came to my territory, and without free prior informed consent, the Ecuadorian government sent militaries and the oil company workers to my community to threaten us, harass us, and with the intention to explore and exploit oil. My community resisted. We took legal action. We took it to the streets. We took it to the media. We also built peace camps and built resistance from within the community. And in that way, we managed to take the oil companies out and take the Ecuadorian government to an international court, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. And we won a historic case, which then advanced indigenous people's rights all across Latin America. I think what I learned from that are a few things that I want to share with you. So one, when this happened, everyone was involved. I was 8 and I was involved. And I'm so grateful to my parents because they really made me feel like my voice mattered. And they made me feel like I could actually do something about this. And as an 8-year-old, like, I did know what I was up against. It was like a big company and it was a government. But I had no idea how powerful they were. So I think that if children are taught from a very young age that what they do matters and that their voice matters, we can create incredible things. So when my community organized, children had a role, a very important one. Young people played a role, parents, mothers, fathers, and grandparents. So we organized, every single member of the community was important, and everyone was contributing in different ways. I think that is key to success. That organizing, the intergenerational organizing, it has to grow and it has to come from within our communities. That's one. The other thing, once again, back to how our voice matters. So back then, no one knew about my community. We were in the middle of the jungle. No one cared about us. We reached out to organizations, NGOs. We took legal action. They bribed the judges, etc. For a very long time, no one cared. And people told us, you know, you're up against a big company, you're up against the government, you'll never win. But guess what? My people's territory today, 140,000 hectares of pristine rainforest, living territory, a space of life, of joy, of community, of culture, has been protected, and it will continue to be protected. So and what I do rescue from that time, even though it was very difficult, at times it felt like we were getting nowhere. All the people in power, everyone who had some sort of tool to, so let's say the legal system, the media was painting us as terrorists or as guerrilleros, and but what I'm trying to say is that even though we're small, or we think we are, our voice does matter and our actions do matter. And even the smallest communities or small children can really, really make a change. And okay, so back to what I was saying. What I do rescue from that time, we were under a lot of pressure. The power dynamics were very unequal. But even though it was very difficult, I saw my community members always laughing, always making jokes, always drinking chicha together. Chicha is a traditional beverage. Spending time together and dancing and making music. And I think that we sometimes forget to enjoy. I think that at least, back home, we're constantly fighting against mining companies, oil companies, road building, agribusiness, gender-based violence, discrimination, everything. And it's almost like we are conditioned, or we somehow are taught that we're not allowed to be happy. We're not allowed to be joyful. We're not allowed to enjoy. So I really think that joy should be part of the struggle. Joy should be part of the resistance. And sort of to the last questions or my reflections about the future. I do agree that the younger generation and the children, they're going to grow up and, you know, they're going to take matter into hands. And I have no doubt that, you know, the younger generations are going to change things. But I also think that it's not totally fair to put all that pressure on our children and the younger generations. Right now, we all have to step up. Everyone, every single one of us. And why do I say this? So if we think about, so I think it's something like 30% of all forests or 30% of all land is on indigenous lands or under indigenous stewardship. And just to give you an example, like back home in Ecuador, about 95% of all pristine rainforest is on indigenous lands. So who are the ones growing up to take care of these forests, to take care of the Amazon, and to take care of the rivers? It's our children, right? But if we think about the education system, the governments in Latin America or around the world are not investing in the children that are going to take care of this planet, especially not in indigenous children or children from local rural communities. So if we're going to put that responsibility on these children, then we also have to make sure that they will have the tools in the future to face this system, right? And to somehow heal what we have done to this world. Yeah, I think that would be my final message.
Thank you. And one thing that that links Francis and Nina's discussion is that the change is longitudinal, and serious change isn't change that happens necessarily in a single lifetime, but it's a series of lifetimes that are committed to it. And if you look at anything that we think of as an important and fundamental change that has made our lives better, whether it's the abolition of slavery, whether it's the beginning of the land back movement, whether it's the environmental movement, whether it's the labor movement, all of those are generational. And so, you know, we have to make sure we do our share, but recognize that we are building things on top of things that have already been built and leaving something, a foundation for building to continue. And with that, I'd like to turn to Peggy Shepard.
So good morning, everyone. Inspiration and joy is so critical. And sometimes just meeting that one person who gives you that inspiration is life-changing. And I met a person like that, and his name was Bill Lynch. And as Francis mentioned, the Jesse Jackson campaign, I was fortunate to meet Bill Lynch and get involved in the first Jesse Jackson campaign. And I was doing the public relations. I was running around meeting all of the young people like many of you here today, who were running as delegates in all the 5 boroughs of New York City. And I was there to promote them, to get them on radio, for them to tell their stories, for them to inspire others. And that campaign got me involved in politics for the first time. And then when the campaign was over and we had really changed the thinking and the landscape in New York City, Bill Lynch said to me, do you want to be behind the scenes or out in front with your own ideas? And I took that challenge. And I ran as a Democratic district leader with a man named Chuck Sutton in New York City. And we were able to begin to do the kind of organizing, real organizing that is so critical to build a movement. And of course, I had an issue that was down the street from my house. Many of you get involved in these issues because of a neighborhood or a community issue that impacts you or your family or your friends. And so we had a sewage treatment plant that was being constructed off our waterfront in West Harlem. And we understood that it was going to be major pollution in our communities that we already understood had asthma at the rates 3 times in our community as other communities in New York City. And so there were some of us who got together and did some organizing, and we were called the Sewage 7 because we accessed the West Side Highway, which is a major traffic artery in New York City. And we accessed the highway, we got out of our cars, and we stopped traffic at 7 o'clock in the morning. And we got arrested, and we were called the Sewage 7. But the outcome of all of that was a 6-column headline in the New York Times saying $55 million committed to fix the North River plant. And that was the work of our organizing. So I was also very fortunate to be down the street from a man named Ben Chavis, a man named Charles Lee, who began the organizing that led to the first People of Color Environmental Justice Summit. And next year will be the 35th anniversary of Summit. And I'd like to ask you all, how many of you all have read the 17 Principles of Environmental Justice? All right now. Well, when we read them again, we realize how contemporary they still are. It almost, anticipated many of the issues that we're still dealing with today. And so when I think about what's working, we've had 60 years of strong public policy and advances that really, I think, reached the apex in the Biden-Harris administration. For the first time, we had a White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. We had the Justice 40 and the infrastructure money that came out, millions of dollars for our communities throughout the country. And so we can really say that we have, I think, helped to develop national and global environmental policy and really impacted so many communities. But where are we going today? We're looking at being closed out, being closed down from the federal government, from federal enforcement, from federal financing. And so that really means, at least for me, that we have to focus at a state and local level. And some of us have states where we can really do things like have cumulative impact regulations on how and where projects are sited. New York and New Jersey now has such a law. Many of us are in states where all of that kind of enforcement is never going to happen, at least not soon. And so we all have to do the serious organizing and movement building that we need. And we've got to leave behind the bullshit, folks. There's so many of us that are so competitive. We can be in the same city and we're not talking to certain other EJ groups, and it's all bullshit and nonsense. It's competitiveness, and we don't need to do that. I mean, I know there's some groups, and Michael, I'm looking at you. We know some folks that we still don't talk to, 30 years later or so. I mean, we've got to get rid of that. And we've got to come together because we know that together we have strength. But again, we've got to leave behind this funding situation where funders fund what they want to do, not what we need. And so how do we get the funding that the green groups have been able to get over the decades. How do we get that continued funding for environmental justice and environmental joy? And that's a key question, and we've got to be able to solve that, and we've got to be able to do the donor development that the green groups have been able to do for so long. And so as I look down the road, you know, we've got 3 more years of this, hopefully no more at the federal level. But are we going to be prepared? Are we going to be in coalition? Are we going to be in alignment to do what's going to be necessary to bring back some of what we had, but to forge ahead with new ideas? And those new ideas need to come from groups like this one. And I think that's what Michael is exactly trying to do. We had that first People of Color Summit where we were in committees developing the principles, developing, you know, a stance and alignment on where we needed to go. And I believe that Michael is trying to do that with this conference, and that you all will be developing what we need to do for the future, and how do we need to begin to do the organizing that will help get us there. So those are some of the things that inspired me. In New York City, we just had our Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice develop a report on all 5 boroughs on the status of environmental justice and what the issues are. And we were able to develop 2 pieces of legislation at the City Council. One created the requirement for the report, and the second piece of legislation has created a requirement that a plan be developed to address that report. And so that's what's inspiring me over the next few years to ensure that the issues that have been raised and identified, that we can bring communities together to begin to address those issues in their communities so that they can have the strong quality of life and public health that we're all looking forward to. So thank you to Michael for being here. It's great to meet so many of you all. I've met a whole handful of folks who've interned and been fellows at my organization at WEACT. And so I'm just very happy to be here and to be inspired. So thank you all.
I want to pull out something that draws all 3 together. And that is the importance of organizing, the importance of recognizing that you have to build community to build power. And sometimes, even when it looks like you don't have the power, you've got to keep working, right? And organizing is hard work, right? But it's absolutely critical. And when I talk about, you know, intergenerational work, it's absolutely true. I mean, what the environmental justice movement has done, and what you all are doing, and what I'd like us to think about, is how do you center justice in arguments for protecting the environment, for planning the future, and have that drive the systems that we are going to have to create. I think, as Peggy pointed out, the last administration really did center justice and said, if we're going to have an energy transition, how is it a just transition? What does that mean? And the other thing that Peggy and Francis and Anita pointed out is that it happens on different scales, and it happens simultaneously. So it's happening on different levels at the same time. And you've got to do the work where you can do the work, as opposed to imagining that you're going to get one big change. Years ago, a group of us, Susan was part of that, we were engaged in civil rights work. And we thought, well, a lot of the civil rights struggle that we've been involved in most of our life, it felt like it was coming up against kind of the barriers to progress. And so there was the same kind of despair that sometimes people feel in the environmental context. But we said, let's go around the country and see what's happening. And what we discovered, later published a book called Louder Than Words. What we discovered is all over the country, there were people taking action. Most of it was below the radar. Most of it was small scale, but it was those small scale actions that could be tied together to create a movement that produced change. And so what we need to do is to continue to inspire local action, continue to, as Peggy said, join hands together and not worry about who's getting the credit, but recognizing that we have to stay focused on the goals we want to achieve. Right? And if you center justice in those goals, you're going to be moving in the right direction. So we have some time left. And what I want to know is, how did the circumstances in Ecuador, right, for Native people are different than, say, the circumstances for Native people here in the United States. So how did you go about constructing a coalition that could exert power to change the circumstances in Ecuador?
Wow, that's a good question. Well, I think in general, the reality of indigenous peoples all over the world are pretty similar. But in Ecuador, there had been many years of our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation, working to strengthening and recognizing indigenous peoples' rights. And a very crucial moment in history happened in 1992, when all Amazonian indigenous people united in a call, in a march to the capital city of Quito, and walked for about 3 weeks from the Amazon to up to the Andes Mountains, and demanded the government to recognize and acknowledge our land rights and land titles. So what happened was that indigenous peoples basically blocked all the roads and paralyzed the country. So who produces the food in Ecuador? It's indigenous communities and local communities. So if indigenous people stop producing food or stop sending food to the big cities, then the people in the cities don't have food. Or if we block the roads, then you can't transport anything to the big cities. So basically, through that march, and at the time, there was a lot of people in the cities also supporting indigenous people because, they were coming from the lower lands where there's warmth, and the Andes Mountains are very cold. So people in Quito actually came with clothes and food and support. And so after about 2 weeks in the capital city, the government finally agreed to grant us our land titles. So about 1 million hectares of Amazon rainforest was legally acknowledged as indigenous lands and as sovereign lands. However, so that means that we own our lands. It's community land. We can't sell it. But the government was very smart. So the land is ours, but the minerals beneath the land surface belongs to the government. And that was like the legal contradiction at the time. However, because we organized, because we used all the different tools that we could access, like media was actually very important, and communication, we ultimately did win the case. So to answer your question with this story, it's not something that happens over a couple of years. It's a process, as you said, of many generations. And it's about what you said, staying focused and believing in it. And I mean, for us, for my people, it's been about dedicating our entire lives to that struggle. Whether that's recognized or acknowledged, or that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. Yeah.
And Francis, I'd like to turn back to you. I wonder if you could describe, in the context of the three questions, right? What do we want to keep? What do we want to leave behind? And what is the future? How did the evolution of the mainstream environmental movement and the groups change to incorporate environmental justice, do you think? What was the process of
Peggy issued a challenge,
that?
early 90s. You know, I think the way environmental justice came into the national, and I'll just say the North River plant, which Peggy just described, was probably NRDC's introduction because it was a New York City issue. And we got to know WEACT and work closely with them. But what happened, I think, was the voice of the environmental justice community was raised and challenged the national environmental community. And the national environmental community took a while, I'm not going to say this happened overnight, to respond. But I would say, and that was the early 90s, and now it's almost 30 years later. And I think over that period, and I'm not saying it happened quickly, but environmental justice is now at the center and a very core component of the national environmental community more broadly. And I think the whole issue of justice, and I said earlier, economic justice, and how environmental justice and economic justice are linked, is very critical to this moment in this country, because there is just huge inequity on every scale. And I was just in San Francisco, and it was like the tech bros rule the place, and then there's sort of everybody else, and the divide is, I mean, is just so palpable. And yet that is not what this country can be about. So I just want to get back to a point that Peggy said about organizing. I've been reading a million articles about what do we do? And one that I read recently by this guy, David Callahan, is back to Peggy's point about the funding community, that they have focused on policy. That's helped a group like NRDC, but haven't focused on civic participation. And if you don't have engagement, you don't have power. And the environmental justice community is about civic engagement and working at the community level and unleashing that power. Part of this article was, in the last election, 42% of Black Americans and 45% of Latino Americans were never contacted about the election, not by a political party of either party, and not by a civic organization. That's almost half of the population that was never brought in or contacted or communicated with. That, to me, is a huge opportunity. And it's one that we have left, so we, the national community, have ignored for too long. But that's where the environmental justice community, because it's very community-based, I think has power. The other thing I want to say is that a lot of our work has focused on urban America, whereas, you know, that's where the bulk of the population is. But we can't win politically with urban America because you can't have a Senate majority in that fashion. So we have to reach much more broadly geographically and figure out, and this gets to Michael's point of like, who are the partners? Who are we going to work with, where do we find common ground? I mean, my own view is most people in this country hate the politics right now. They hate the corporations who own so much and are penalizing the economic well-being of everybody else. They're looking for something to hold on to and connect to. They feel misrepresented on every score, maybe not the far left or the far right. I'm sure the far left actually feels completely left out. Maybe the far right feels like they have a connection, but they're not the majority of this country. We need to figure out how to reach many more people and find common ground. I mean, this is, I'm sure, my age, but I'm like, people want to talk to each other. They want to get along. And that's where I think community-based work is so essential, because people have the same values. They care about the well-being of their families. They care about whether they have food on the table and a home to go to, and their children are well educated, and they're breathing clear air and water, and they have access to nature. That, those are common values that people hold. So how do we find common values and organize around it and build the power that's going to allow us the future that we want to see?
Years ago, I was speaking to a group called Green Latinos, and I only made one small point, but it underlines what Francis was saying. And the point I made was that if you're not registering voters, you're not doing environmental work. That is, you've got to be out talking to the people. You've got to make sure they are in a position to exercise their power, right? If you want to create the change that's possible, you have to then build the means to create that change. And so I completely agree with you. I don't know how much time we have left, but I'd like to turn it over to Peggy if you have any further words.
Sure. Well, racism and classism is at the heart of our issues. And we've been sort of isolated in the environmental justice community. When we talk about community development, why aren't we talking about environment? When we're talking about housing, why aren't we talking about environment? When we're talking about civil rights, why aren't we talking about environment? Why are all of those sectors so independent of each other? And without a common language, a common vision, we're going to continue being isolated in that way. And we've got to come together in stronger coalitions. I know people are tired of hearing about coalitions. We've started so many of them. But we have to have a coalition where we are engaged in civics and politics. We've got to do more in terms of developing C4 organizations that are interviewing candidates and endorsing candidates based on the issues that are so dear to us and our communities. And until we begin to do that, I'm not sure how successful we're going to be. But we, again, have got to come together. Now, academia has been one of those successes. I mean, we're here. We're being convened by academic institutions, community-based research that I know my organization and many EJ organizations are engaged in, because we've got a strong public health message. We have strong public health impacts from pollution. So we've been able to have those kinds of alignment with academic institutions. But now we've got to ensure that we're doing that with our labor unions, with our community development and housing groups, and certainly our civil rights groups as well.
One of the first environmental justice meetings I went to was back before most people in this room were born, I think 1978. And it was convened by a group that I don't think exists anymore in its form, but it was called Environmentalists for Full Employment. And it was a union-based group who recognized that the issues of livelihood are critical, and they're tied to how we protect the environment, how we protect working people, and how we bring justice back into the conversation. And I think you're exactly right. Is we have to link hands together.
Green jobs.
Green jobs, exactly. So the importance of working where you are first, working where you are, and building from that work outwards is, I think, one of the lessons I've taken from you all. Right? What we want to leave behind are those things that haven't worked. That even though we fought hard to get some things and to protect them, if we recognize that they haven't been doing exactly what we wanted them to do, let's figure out what we need to do and leave some of that behind. Because the future we're going to build is to take the ideas that motivated a lot of you and brought a lot of you into this room today and fit them into the policies and actions at all levels, the local level, the regional level, the state level, the national level, and work where you are. I think that's one of the things I took from today. So with that, I urge you all to think creatively, think boldly, think imaginatively, bring the ideas that these three women gave to you today so generously, and let's get some work done. Thank you.
Hello. Hello, everyone. I'm going to give a few quick announcements. My name is Diana Nguyen. I'm one of the co-coordinators for the Environmental Joy Congress. Thank you so much for meeting with us today. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time and making the space to be here. Everyone in person, everyone online over Zoom and on YouTube. We just heard from a few incredible voices during our plenary and our welcoming remarks this morning. Michael Galopter, Tony Lin, Professor Gerald Torres, Francis Beinecke, Peggy Shepard, and Nina Gualinga. But these won't be the only voices you'll be hearing today. At 10:30 a.m., we will break for our first Congress session to tackle some critical questions for our environmental justice movement. Those questions will be what is working and what to leave behind. And I'm going to take a quick moment to introduce our four themes, our Congress leaders, and our scribes that you will be joining during each session. So sustainable infrastructure. At 10:30, you will meet at Burke Auditorium in this room, and you will be joined by Congress leaders Dr. Amy Yabua-Kokrume, Jennifer Krill, Phil Thompson, and our Congress scribes Anna Weschner-Dunning. Sustainable economics, you will meet at Bowers Auditorium in Sage Hall, which is the building on my left. You will be joined by Congress leaders Don Chen, Mariama Williams, Mark Watson, and Rao Narasimha, and our Congress scribe, Esther Sosa. Spiritual and mutual aid, you will be meeting in room 24, Sage Hall, also the room and building on my left behind me. You will be joined by Congress leaders Aya de Leon, Brandon Maka-Ava, Kristen Cordero, and Shauno Duwole. You will also be joined by Congress scribes Rebecca Sullivan. Ways of knowing and decision-making, you will meet in room G01 of this building in the basement or on the ground floor. You will be joined by our Congress leaders Asha Brundage-Moore, Carol Santana, David Cordero, Emma Humphries, Tara Toles O'Laughlin, and also our Congress scribe Yolanda Sanchez. We're also joined today by a couple of friends from New Haven in New York, our high school students. You will meet in room A51 in Watson, and our youth leader team will join you. Thank you everyone for joining. We'll take a 15-minute break, and I have one more announcement. If you left any of your coats at the coat rack on the first floor, please bring them up to the third floor coat rack. The coat rack on the first floor is our school's winter clothing donation drive. So if you leave it there, it might get donated. All right, everyone go grab a drink, take a break. We'll see you at 10:30. Thank you.